South Queensland Crushers. Gone too soon. Only in the competition from 95 to 97, the South Queensland Crushers were the first attempt from the governing body in rugby league to expand into a second Brisbane team. What went wrong? Well, a lot of things. Signing Garrick Morgan to some ridiculous amount of money and getting 2 games out of him. Yeah, not ideal. The rugby league climate at the time was very volatile, with Super League coming in, the Brisbane Broncos, the champions of the Super League cause, and the poor old South Queensland Crushers got just 3 years in the competition before they were squeezed out for the NRL in 1998. The rugby league just didn't lend itself to allowing a team to find its feet, especially in the competitive Brisbane market when the Broncos were at the top of the game. But they did get some things right. What were those things? For one, was their regional name. They were the South Queensland Crushers. It was 100% spot on for the time. There was the Gold Coast, obviously, there was the Brisbane Broncos, and the North Queensland Cowboys were coming in. So the South Queensland regional name was just perfect. The Crushers, acceptable. Not an outstanding one. One of those ones where they sort of outthought themselves a little bit. Obviously the Crushers with the sugar cane, you had to think a little bit, the classic sort of Crushers sounding very American. And it kind of made sense when you had the steam train and the sugar cane and all the rest of it that went into it, but the strongest thing that team had going for it was the South Queensland name. And to be fair, the Crushers nickname kind of also lent itself to Central Queensland, to North Queensland as well, even more so than the Cowboys potentially. But after just 3 years, they were gone and the Brisbane Broncos had sole possession of the Brisbane region. Heck, Queensland. So the news this week, which is June in 2020, came out that Peter V'landys, the chairman of the ARLC, has declared that there will be, if there will be a 17th NRL team, it will be from Brisbane. There will be a second team. He's unequivocally stated this is where the 17th team will be. In his comments, he pretty much dismissed Perth as an option. He said if they're rusted on AFL states, we're not going there. Well, not initially. The problem being in that you can say there's a 17th team, but 3 months ago, rugby league was on its knees. It was almost dead, or mostly dead, as the classic line in Princess Bride goes. And Peter V'landys was putting his hand out for more money. Money he ended up getting from Foxtel and Channel 9 as they extended the rights deal. More on that another time. He also put his hand out to the government, said, well, can you help us? And yet here we are, like 3 months later, and we're talking about a 17th team. Now, admittedly, it was on 100% footy, and they would have asked that question. He was just very bullish, which is V'landys' way, and to be fair, I don't mind that. But when will we see it? Well, it's not going to be for 5 years, it's probably not going to be for 10 years. If we see it, it will definitely be in Brisbane though, and V'landys has spoken. So what the heck do we call it? Is it Brisbane? Is it South Queensland again? Is it the Western Corridor? Is it another name of some description that we don't really identify south of the border with Queensland that only Queenslanders do? It's a big question. So what I'm going to give you is a bunch of options for both the regional name and the nickname, and a reason behind it all about why I think that this is the name they have to go with. And it's a little bit left field, but it's also one that I think fits. And it ticks the biggest box of all, which I think is historically creating an instant connection with the fan base. And it begs the question, is Brisbane, the name, the regional name, exclusive to the Broncos? No. And to think that it would be the only name in rugby league that's called Brisbane, it's just stupid. Yes, you can have 2 Brisbane teams in the National Rugby League. It's allowed. And Brisbane doesn't own it. I mean, look at them in other sports. There's Brisbane's Akimbo, Brisbane Lions in the AFL, Brisbane Roar in the A-League for at least a little while longer. The Brisbane Bullets, the Brisbane Bandits, the Brisbane Heat in the cricket. I mean, they're the big names that are sitting out there at the moment. Brisbane is not exclusive to the Broncos, so we can call them the Brisbane somethings. But do you want it? It's a fair question. There really, I think, are only 2 other options that you can go with, and I'll reveal them a little bit later. So nickname, that's the second thing. Well, we've got the Broncos and the Cowboys already in Queensland, plus the Titans, so realistically anything cattle or herding or anything like that related is out the window. And I'll go through the things that you just can't include. There's a list. Let me read it. Okay, steers, drovers, wranglers, herd, stockmen, cowpunchers. Apparently that's a variant of cowboy. Longhorns, muster, oxen, rustlers, my favourite, the Brisbane Beef, bring them back.
Where is the beef?
All those variants gone. Queensland Bulls, that's the cricket team. You can't have that either. And then on a national scale, in other competitions, you've got the Heat, the Firebirds, the Blaze, the Fire, the Scorchers, Bandits, the Cobras, the Breakers, the Barracudas. All them gone. I don't think you can reuse them. Now, it's bad news, I think, for the Brisbane Bombers, if I'm honest. I don't mind the name, but I just don't think it's a brand name that's going to get jumped on board from a fan's perspective. I think it's too AFL. But keep that in mind, because I change my mind in a sec. Other names in Brisbane on a more semi-professional level are the Strikers, the Tigers, the Devils, the Magpies, the Seagulls, Brothers, Healers, Capitals, Spartans, Rollers, Wolves, Roller Girls. Then in the Queensland Cup, you've got Dolphins, Jets, Seagulls, Falcons, Bears, Cutters, Blackhawks, Hunters, Clydesdales, Panthers, etc., etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of names, and I don't think you can rule them all out, but you can pretty much say most of them, they're not going to track with their second Brisbane team. So you're sitting there going, well, you've ruled all these things out. What about ones you actually like? Okay, so I'm going to go back to the 3 keys. Regional name's got to be right. Nickname's got to be right. And it's got to have an historical element. There's got to be a link there. You can't just start this team from scratch. It is the number one mistake that the Gold Coast Titans made when they came to the competition. They completely ignored the Gold Coast Tweed Giants, the Gold Coast Seagulls, the Gold Coast Chargers, that brief foray into the Gladiators with the worst logo I think I've ever seen from a modern perspective. I'll flash it up on screen. You cannot ignore some history. So whatever this team is, it has to include the South Queensland Crushers in its heritage. It has to. And personally, they've got to borrow from another team as well, and borrow large. So regional name, I think there's 3 options. Brisbane, whatevers. But Brisbane, probably the strongest brand they're going to get. And if they're willing to muscle in on the Broncos, which I think they should, this is the one I think that is the most powerful from a brand perspective. They've got to be the Brisbane somethings. If they decide not to go in that direction, there are 2 things they can go with. They could call themselves Queensland. South Queensland are pinch, but I think they can call themselves Queensland. They will get away with Queensland. Now, yes, there's the Queensland Maroons and Origin, and whether they can get from a copyright point of view is the question here. But Queensland is an option. South Queensland, I think they could go back to, but then you'd probably have to hitch yourself to the South Queensland Crushers. I don't think they're going to do that. In terms of the name, I think they definitely make the link historically and have that as part of their heritage. But if they go South Queensland, they have to become the Crushers. I don't think that'll happen. So what's the third option? Well, I think it's the one that I lean towards. It's either this or Brisbane, and I think it's Northern. Now, you can argue there's North Queensland. Yeah, great, fantastic, but we don't really call them North Queensland. It's not something that we've ever shrunk down because there was a North Sydney that was North. And this is the key, I think, in regards to naming this team. In 5 years or 10 years or whenever it happens. It's not going to happen soon, people. So you can call them Norths as a nickname, but I think Northern something. I think you go with, and it's been sitting on my shirt the whole time, the Bears. I think they need to be called the Bears. Northern Bears. And I'll tell you why. It works on a bunch of levels. They can be called Norths, which is instant brand value. Admittedly, it's not synonymous with Queensland, but there is the Norths Devils. They have a team up there that has Norths in it. It's not exclusive to them, and I think it doesn't completely rule out that it's a regional area. If you go Northern Bears, it fits. Think about it. Brisbane Broncos versus Northern Bears. It rolls off the tongue. You can call them Norths if you want to. North Queensland don't have this exclusivity, and that's because North Sydney had it before, and this is the key. I was big about it before. You've got to include South Queensland, and you've also got to jump on the North Sydney branding. You have to. Now, they are Sydney, I get that, but Bears is such a strong name, and look, hey, it's been there before. They were the Brisbane Bears before they became the Brisbane Lions, and there's no exclusivity, I'm pretty sure, on that name. Why not? You can have the Brisbane Bears or you can have the Northern Bears. I like Northern Bears from a purely linking everything together point of view. North is still considered, from very much us here in New South Wales, North is Queensland. I don't think the North Queensland Cowboys North and Bear thing is an issue, because you can argue that South Queensland shouldn't have been South Queensland because the Gold Coast are actually more south than South Queensland. But the powerful thing here is the historical links. You've instantly got a fan base. North Sydney Bears fans will cheer if this team comes back. They will not have an issue with it being in Brisbane, even if you only play one game a year at North Sydney Oval, which I think is entirely doable. Every time you come back down to Sydney, you'll be playing in front of old Bears fans. You've got an instant colour scheme. It's red and black, a bit of white if you want to. There's no other team that has that anymore. It's there for you. Now, the other option is North Brisbane Bears. I don't like it as much. It's either Brisbane Bears or it's Northern Bears. And that link, that South Queensland Crushers link, all those are old boys immediately. Volandis has pretty much categorically said it's Brisbane or bust. I think the Bears, they can keep playing the long game if they want to. It could take a long time. I just don't think that it's a financially viable option to say that they're going to be sitting there by themselves on the Central Coast. Sorry, this is the link. You jump on the Brisbane bandwagon, North Sydney, and you keep your club and your colours and your history alive. You start with these guys. I just think it makes sense. But the Bears should be jumping on this. You could play a feeder team out of North Sydney Oval if you wanted to. And in this day and age, and in the 5 to 10 years from now, all the financial issues we're having at the moment because of COVID, they're not going to be there to the same extent. And it makes sense to have the Bears back in the National Rugby League. Do you like Bears? Do you like Brisbane Bears? Do you like Northern Bears? Do you like Queensland Bears? That's the other option. There are some other names, though, that I have come up with, if you don't like that. But I think that's the number one. Now, we had the Western Reds. We have the Australian Kangaroos. There are the Queensland Reds. But what's wrong with Roos? Can we get around it? Because North Melbourne are the Kangaroos in AFL. What about the Queensland Roos? Is that an option? The Eastern Grey Kangaroo is all over Queensland. it could work, but it'd have to be probably Queensland Roos, not Brisbane Roos, Northern Roos. That's too much close like North Melbourne. This is probably my second favourite, with my third favourite, which isn't too far behind, which is the Goannas. Brisbane Goannas, that could work. I don't mind that at all. Northern Goannas, not as strong. Queensland Goannas, now I think Brisbane Goannas, though, would work. It ticks the box of a predator, of an angry sort of kids can like it kind of deal. Merchandising point of view, yeah, you can go crazy with things that stick on the wall. There you go, Goannas that you stick on the wall. But I think that's a name that could fit. There are a couple of others that I'm going to put out there. They're not as strong as those top three. So I've got Brisbane Bears or Northern Bears. I've got Brisbane Roos or Queensland Roos, and I have the Brisbane Goannas as my three favourites if you're going to go with a name and a region and tick those boxes. The other options, Brisbane Brown Snakes. I don't mind this one. They'll end up being the Snakes or the Browns. I like it. It's cool. But I don't think it's going to be the name. And the Brisbane Barras. Now, the problem with the Barra or the Barramundi is that very rarely they're found in Brisbane. You go Queensland Barras if you want to. It's an iconic image. It is much more associated with Northern Queensland and the Northern Territory, but before that becomes the thing that you can't have, look at all the names around rugby league and its sport. It doesn't matter if they're in their area or not. Let's not pretend that that's a factor, all right? All right, you've survived this long through the video. I'm going to give you the bonus round, and that is the last two options that I think they could go up with. One is legitimate. One is obviously a joke. I'll leave the joke to the end, but I'll get to the legitimate one. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this would be fantastic. It's already got street cred, okay? It's already got a mascot, and you've immediately got two very influential Australians who are in media as your number one A and number one B or number one equal number one fans. The Brisbane Wombats. Fatso is immediately a mascot. Roy and HG are just your number one fans like that. I mean, Roy would give up the Lithgow Shamrocks for the Brisbane Wombats. I'm confident about that. And as an MC, HG would just be fantastic. I mean, he could come up with a lore for the Brisbane Wombats in about 5 minutes. He's a genius. And then Roy would then extrapolate and exaggerate the brilliance of that background. I think Brisbane Wombats doesn't sound too bad. I'm all for it. And Fatso the Wombat. I mean, you've instantly got all those Olympians that carried Fatso around the Sydney Olympic Games as your ambassadors. It's just, I mean, it's 20 years ago, but it just makes sense to get on the Brisbane Wombat train. Finally, the joke, and it's a variant on the one that I think they should be called. And this could be the fun nickname that the fans come up with, that they look forward to calling themselves, or it's just the nicknames that all the other fans call them when they're going horribly. And the Brisbane Drop Bears, or the Northern Drop Bears. Where is the beat? So there you go. I've been Warrick Nicolson, and I've given you my best ideas, and educated, hopefully, a little bit, ideas for the team name, not only the team name, but the regional name and the nickname, and historical links for a second Brisbane team. There is a clear number one option, and that is the Brisbane Bears or the Melbourne Bears. Second option is probably the Brisbane Goannas or the Brisbane Roos or the Queensland Roos. That's the ideas that I'm putting forward. Wombats as a bit of a dark horse there. If you've got any ideas, put them down in the comments below. I would love to hear what you think of the ideas that I put forward. Do you think that the South Queensland Crushers and North Sydney Bears link is as important as I do? And do you have any other options? Throw them out there. I'll make sure I reply to every comment. And hopefully, in the next 5 to 10 years, if not longer, we might actually see a 17th team. Personally, I think we should have 18 teams if we go to that length, and it's the job of the NRL and the clubs to develop its playing talent to the point where we can bring in a couple more teams, if that is the decision. I'm actually happy with 16, if I'm perfectly honest with you, but I do see the value in having two Brisbane teams in the future. So the Brisbane Bears, Northern Bears, I think Northern Bears, that's my favourite. Bring them on in 2033.